So the letter of intent is a document that you're going to use for your client to present it to the listing agent. In this case, we're going to be reviewing a letter of intent for commercial leases. This document, it's important to understand that it is not a binding document. This is not the contract. So whatever goes here is going to go to the listing agent. More than likely, they are going to do what's called a red line, which I will also go over on this side here. This is what a red line is, and we're going to go over that red line real quick. But for the first part of this training, we're going to go over all the sections that you should have in a letter of intent to be able to look professional and cover your tenant's needs. Okay. So I always start my letter of intent listing who the broker is. John Smith, NAI RealVest. In this case, we could do whatever the broker is that is the listing broker. You're going to want to address them right here. Everything that is in red is something that you can change or should update. So that's the way I did the template. So if it's in red, it's something that you need to look at and update that information. Okay. So the property address, that's pretty self-explanatory. Wherever the property is, whatever the unit is, you want to make sure that it's the first thing that's on that letter of intent so that they know what this is about. This verbiage here is very basic verbiage. It does not need to change. It basically says that all these terms and conditions may be incorporated into a lease that is the legal binding document that is acceptable to both the lessor, which is the landlord, and the leasee, which is the tenant. Okay. You're going to want to put the address of the premises again here, and you're going to want to state who your parties are. For the lessor, I always put TBD. Was that to be determined? Why? Because sometimes I don't know if it's just a person. I don't know if it's a corporation that they want to have the lease under. So in order to avoid this back and forth, I just leave it to be determined. Let the listing agent handle that part because they're the ones that know who the landlord is. For the leasee, you want to make sure that you're very clear on how they are going to be on the contract. Okay. This is important because most of the time, even if they have a corporation, the landlord is going to want what's called a personal guarantee. And a personal guarantee means that their name, their credit gets pulled. They're going to look at their personal financials. They're going to look at their bank statements. They're going to look at their credit. Okay. So it's very important for you to know it's John Smith doing business as X corporation. Because even though your tenant says, "Oh, I'm putting it under my LLC," you need to know and be able to tell and advise your client more than likely they are still going to ask for a personal guarantee. Are you ready for that? And this is where that financial conversation comes in. This is where you need to know what their financials look like. You need to know what their credit looks like. Ask them, is your credit good? I had a situation last week where the tenant has a business. It's a thriving business. They're making well over six figures. They're ready to open up a new location. They pulled the credit. They had a repo on the credit, and it was because they co-signed for their son, a car that got repoed. Because the credit was bad, even though everything else was good, they got denied in three different locations. So these are very, very crucial points that you always need to ask about before you move things forward. You need to prepare your client and know what your client's financial status is. All right, moving on. Square footage. This is very basic, right? You know the size of the unit that you're going to be putting your client in potentially, so you want to put the square footage here. You can always verify that on public record if it's a standalone property. If it's not, usually it's on the listing, or you just talk to the listing agent and ask them what the actual square footage of the unit is, and that's what you use on the letter of intent. The lease term. In commercial real estate, leases can be anywhere between 3 to 5 years, sometimes 10 or more, depending on the business, depending on the location. In rare cases, you're going to see landlords that are only doing 1 year. I've seen this often now in commercial real estate. Lower liability. They give 1 year on a new tenant to test the tenant out. Okay, I don't like those because they don't pay well. But more than likely, the standard is 3 to 5 years. So what do? I put the lease term in months. So if it's 3 years, 36 months, 5 years, 60 months. I always put the base term here. Intended use. Is it a coffee shop? Is it a mechanic shop? Is it a retail center? Is it a medical office? This is very important because you want to be able to get the certificate of use for your client. And if you are being explicit of what the intended use is, the landlord might come back and say, I'm sorry, this is not an allowable use, or yeah, that's fine, we can put them in there. Okay. Lease commencement. So there is a difference between lease commencement and rent commencement. And I'm going to explain that. I always put commencement, I always put to be determined, dates agreed upon by landlord and tenant. You don't know if you're going to sign for April 15th. You don't know if you're going to sign for May 1st. You don't know if you're going to go back and forth on negotiations for another 3 weeks and you're not going to start the lease until mid-May. So you want to keep that a little bit open because at the end of the day, that's going to be determined once you finalize your terms. Okay, so that's not the most crucial component of a letter of intent. So you always typically leave that open because we'll figure that out once we get the important terms negotiated. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the lease commencement, is that the day that they move in to do repairs, or is that the day that they occupy? What is the
Lease commencement is the date they sign the lease and they say the terms hereafter commence on this date. What does that mean? They could potentially, yes, move in and start doing their construction, start doing their build out, but that doesn't mean that they commenced paying rent because you got abated rent on the terms, on the negotiations, right? So lease commencement is when the contract starts, basically. In layman's terms, lease commencement means the contract has started. All terms are in effect. This is where the clock starts ticking on free rent. The clock starts ticking on build out and tenant improvements or reimbursements. So that's lease commencement. Okay. Rent commencement is when they start paying rent. And so the reason that I put a rent commencement here is because I usually always ask for free rent for my tenants. When I'm working commercial leases, that is standard. I always ask for at least 3 months of rent abated, which is what it's called, because any tenant that comes in is going to have to go to the city, apply for permits sometimes, apply for a certificate of use. Sometimes they need to change the use. Sometimes there's build out that needs to happen. Sometimes there's licenses that need to be approved. And that usually takes a few months. So it would be doing a disservice to your client if you had them sign a lease and they immediately had to start paying rent because they're not even operational at that point yet, right? So you want to be able to use the fact that they they need to set up the business first and be actively open for business before they have to pay rent. So, rule of thumb for me is when I'm talking to my clients and I say, okay, well, how long does it take for you guys to get up and running? They'll know how long it takes for the licenses to get approved. You should know that getting a certificate of use, if it was the same use before, meaning it was a second gen, it's fairly easy to get that certificate of use, but could still take 30 days, right? So let's say in this example, they want 3 months of abated rent. In 3 months, they can be up and running. They're good. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say 6 months. Why? Because we're negotiating, right? We're not going to go in on the bare minimum. We're going to start at 6 months. And if they pull back, okay, 5 months, 4 months, and hopefully we land at three. Okay. That's just a negotiation tactic that I usually use. Total rent. Whenever I write out the rent, I like to be very specific on what is base rent. Okay. And you all have seen a price per square foot. If you're on Craigslist, you've seen $12 a square foot. You've seen $15 a square foot. Sometimes you see $15 a square foot triple net. Okay. What does that mean? That means that $15 a square foot is your base rent. And we'll go ahead and do a quick math problem here. Can you guys see my calculator?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say that the price per square foot base rent is $15 a square foot, and it's a 2,000 square foot unit. So what I do is I take 15 times 2,000, and that gives me 30,000. That is the annual rental amount. So in order to get my monthly, I divide by 12, and that gives me 2,500. So for the total rent, I'm going to put $15 a square foot, which equals $2,500 a month. Okay. And let's say that you have already talked to the listing agent, which you should have, right? And they tell you that the triple net or the operating expense, which are interchangeable terms, okay, what is triple net? That is your taxes and insurance and sales tax. In Florida, there's no more sales tax on lease commercial leases, but we still use the term triple net. Okay. Operating expenses is usually a term that's interchanged in industrial warehouses more often than not. But it means the same thing. What are the operating expenses? What is the triple net? What is the CAM, common area maintenance? Usually they'll tell you triple net is $7 all in. Okay, $7 all in at 2,000 square feet. That gives me $14,000 a year in triple net expenses. I divide that by 12. That gives me $1,166.67. So what do? I put $7 a square foot triple net and 1,666 and 67 cents a month for the triple net. And then usually what I like to do is I like to total. So that total would be what? $4,166.67 a month. And I like to be very detailed here because you'd be surprised how much they try to change that on you. And if you got to be very clear, look, this is exactly what we discussed. This is what I want it to be, especially if you're submitting this letter of intent and you're trying to get a discount. Because what if they're asking for 20, but your client says, no, the most I can do is 15 because I want to stay under $4,500 a month, right? So you want to be very specific that you're not discounting the triple net because that will never change. Taxes and insurance stay the same. Those are numbers that cannot be negotiated, but you can negotiate the base rent, right? So if they're asking 20 and your client says, I got to stay under 45, the base rent is the one that needs to be negotiated. Does that make sense? Okay. Rent abatement. All that means is free rent, months that I do not have to pay rent. I usually, like I mentioned, if I want 3 months, I'm always going to go in high. So I'm going to go in with 6 months. The verbiage stays standard for lease commencement to allow time for necessary permit approvals and build out to open for business. It's very standard. You don't need to get too specific unless you're asking for like a year or more than 6 months because I'll give you an example. I had a PPEC, which is a prescribed pediatric extended care facility. It takes 6 to 8 months to get an approval on the license for them. So I had to be very specific in rent abatement. Look, I'm asking for 12 months because they need to get the approval on their licensure. And it's not just your typical build out and certificate of use. So I had to be more specific. But if you're just asking for free rent for most 80% of your commercial lease clients, always start high. Always start at 6 months and then you just allow the negotiations to settle where they're going to settle. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you'll get the 6 months. Okay. Rent escalations, that is something that you always will see in a commercial lease. You're going to see that the lease amount, the base rent, will go up by 3%, 4%, or 5% every single year. And so to protect your client, I always put on here, I always say, I don't want it to go more than 3 years annually, which is your standard. Okay. Any questions on rent escalation? They
Yeah.
might come back and say, no, we do 4 years.
So to understand, if they have a 5-year lease, they can escalate up to three years, but not five. So three would be the cap
No.
on escalation.
No, if they have a 5-year lease,
Mhm.
every single year they can escalate the base rent by 3%.
Okay. And so you're saying that on this LOI, you're asking for the escalation to only go for 3 years.
No,
of the
I'm
5
asking
years?
the escalation to be capped at 3% because
Oh, at
sometimes
3%. Okay.
some landlords will escalate 5% annually.
Okay. So the cap is 3% on the actual escalation for each
Yeah.
year.
And
Okay.
3% is standard. So it's not like it's crazy that they're escalating every year. That is actually when you do business knock pop-ins, that is actually one of the pain points that you can bring up to a tenant. Like, don't you hate that you have those annual escalations?
Hmm.
Yes, because it's a standard in commercial leases that every single year your lease, well, even on residential too, by the way, your rent will go up by a certain percentage, right? And in commercial, I've seen it upwards of 5 to 10% depending on how long the term is.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks for that
Okay?
clarification.
Yeah. Security deposit, I always put on here the most minimal security deposit, but it could be 1, 2, or 3 months of rent as a security deposit. Sometimes, depending on how creditworthy and how fluid and how liquid they are with their proof of funds, they could do 1 month security deposit and first month paid rent. Sometimes, if they're not that creditworthy, they're going to do 2, 3, 4 months of security deposit plus first and last month rent. This all will depend on the application portion of the process and how creditworthy your client is. For the LOI purpose, I always go as low as possible. I always go 1 month security deposit and let them be the ones that tell me what they're going to charge for the security deposit once that my tenant does the application. All right.
Question.
Yeah.
So it goes along with the security deposit. When you do the security deposit, that is different or in addition to advanced rent, correct?
100%. Good question. So you're going to see two factors on security deposit. They're going to either have a security deposit, which could be 1, 2, 3, 4, however many months worth of rent. And then advance rent means it's prepaid. So it's not money that they're going to lose to a security deposit or have held in escrow. It could be like he's just or she is paying a month ahead of time or 2 months ahead of time. So let's put this in context, right? Let's say that you were able to negotiate 3 months worth of rent. The lease starts in January, okay? And your security deposit is 1 month of rent with 2 months prepaid rent. What does that mean? That means January, February, and March are free months, no rent. April and May are prepaid already. They start paying in June. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I always like to give my clients an option to renew. What if the location turns out to be a great location for them? The last thing you want is for them to get kicked out after their initial term. So I always like to give them an option to renew. What does this mean? That means that when their lease is about to be up, it gives them the first right of refusal to renew or to move out. And if it's going well for them, they're going to want to renew for another 5 year, 3 year, 10-year option. So, based off of what I'm requesting, let's say I'm requesting a 60-month term, which is 5 years, I always like to give them at least one renewal option for them to be able to be the first right of refusal, meaning they can decide whether they renew or they stay for another 5 years. Okay. The condition of premises, depending on the condition of the premises, right? Because sometimes we have new plazas, new strip centers. Sometimes we have places that have been not in use for many years. And so there are going to be certain situations where you're going to want the landlord to fix the AC, to put flooring, to put up a wall, a firewall, whatever it might be. But for the most part, it's about mechanical and plumbing into the unit and also the condition of the HVAC. So this is very standard verbiage. Lesser will service mechanical and plumbing into the unit, meaning the landlord, if they're not individually metered, they're handling the mechanical and plumbing into the unit, but will not be responsible for plumbing or mechanical issues inside the premises. Usually, the tenant is the one that has to handle that and has to do regular maintenance on the plumbing, on the mechanical, and on the AC. But as long as they're maintaining regular service on these things, they're that's their responsibility. But outside of the premises, it's the landlord's responsibility. Otherwise, it's usually as is. That's why there's build out. That's why there's tenant improvement. That's why there's a lot of different things and factors that can be negotiated. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. Everything else is pretty standard. I always put this on a letter of intent. Some people don't, but I always like to protect my compensation and my representation when I submit a letter of intent. Even though it's not a binding contract, it's in writing. It's something that shows that I brought this tenant to this landlord. And so I always like to put my name on here. I always like to put the fact that I represent the tenant, and I always like to put my commission. And this is something that I do that not everyone does, but I always put paid at the time of lease execution. The reason I do this is because commercial leases sometimes will pay 50% when you sign the lease and 50% when your tenant starts to pay rent. And if you got them 6 months of free rent, guess what? You're not going to get that other 50% of your commission till 6 months down the road when they start paying rent. But if I can establish from the get-go that I want to get paid the full amount at lease execution, a lot of the time I get paid the full amount at lease execution because the landlord will look at it as this is part of the negotiations. This is what he wants. I'm okay. I'm willing to do that. And they will pay me at lease execution. Okay. And it is 3% of the lease term's base rent. You're not getting paid on the full rental amount. Remember, we went over the rental amounts here, where you have your base rent, you have your triple nets, and you have your CAMs, right? You're only getting paid on the base rent full term amount. So to do the example, let's say the 2,500 is the base rent, and they are doing a 5-year term, which is 60 months. You're going to get paid typically 3% on 150,000, which is about $4,500. Okay. And then you just put your client's information, have them sign, and you submit this in two formats. You submit it in PDF with the signature, and you submit it in a Word document because you want to give a Word document to the landlord so they can do what's called a red line. Okay. And this is an actual lease that got redlined and sent back to me. And so I'm going to go over the things that a landlord will typically push back on, right? So as usual, like I mentioned, I always put to be determined. The agent put in the landlord's information. Okay, so now I know what the landlord information is. They push back on the rent commencement. I said rent commencement to start 5 months. They said 1 month. I pushed back on 3 months. That's where we settled. And as you can tell, the red line is landlord, the blue line is me going back a third time, pushing back on the negotiations. Obviously, I went in, they were asking $22 a square foot. I went in low. I went in 1850 because I wanted to keep my client below $4,500 or below $5,000. They pushed back at 21. I pushed back at 20. We settled at 21, I think it was that we settled. But basically what the red line is this is how you get the communication started. This is why an LOI is so crucial to be able to specifically get as close to what your client wants as possible. You would not be able to do such a good job with this if you didn't have this document to help you, right? So they added this right here. Remember, I told you that no matter what the LLC is, they're always going to ask for a personal guarantee. So here it is. They are asking for the doctor to be a personal guarantor. They're asking for very specific financials from the doctor, and they push back on that red line. And that's part of what I'm working on right now is getting the financials from the doctor and his wife. This is a very important factor. If your client is married, they will more than likely ask for the spouse's finances as well, personal guarantee. Okay. Now, what I added to this LOI that I did not cover before is what's called a contingency. Contingencies means if there's anything outside of your typical commercial lease, that your client needs or is requesting, you're going to put it on the LOI as a contingency. In this case, the doctor said, look, what if I go in here, there's they push back on my certificate of use, they push back on my permitted use within the 3 months that I'm getting abated, and I have to pull out of the contract. I need to have something that protects me from that. So I put in the contingency. This letter of intent and any resulting lease agreement shall be contingent upon tenant's ability to obtain all necessary licenses, permits, approvals, and a certificate of use required to legally operate its intended business at the premises. In the event that despite tenant's good faith and diligent effort, tenant is unable to obtain any required licenses, permits, approvals, and or certificate of use within the period due to the governmental or regulatory restrictions or other factors outside of tenant's control, tenant shall have the right to terminate the lease without penalty, and any deposits paid shall be returned in full. I did my part. My client wanted to see that I was fighting for that contingency. I put in the contingency. Will that contingency be approved in this market? I would say probably a 70-30% chance that a 30% chance that it would get approved. In this case, it did not get approved because it's a very popular area. There was like 5 other doctors looking at the same space. So the landlord said, no way. There's no way I'm going to approve that and give that to your client. So it got pushed back. But at least your client feels good that you're fighting for their protection, right? That you're doing what they're asking you to do. But that's it. That covers the letter of intent. Are there any questions on the letter of intent?
Oh, there are.
Well, please ask.
Okay. So just to clarify, because I was trying to do my chicken scratch, and even though I know you provide this. So the lease
It's recorded, by the way, so I'll send this to you guys.
Okay. The lease commencement is the date all parties sign. The
That's
rent
lease
abate.
execution is the date all parties sign.
Oh, okay. I
Okay.
think on there you put lease commencement, no?
Lease commencement is the date that the terms begin.
Date terms begin.
So
Okay.
let's say, for example, it's April 13th today, and you sign all the documents, you sign the lease, but the lease states the lease commences May 1st.
So
Okay,
date the terms begin. Rent
correct.
commence is
The
that's
date that your tenant starts paying rent. So let's say the lease commences on May 1st, right? So lease execution is today. Everyone signs. Lease commences May 1st. You got 3 months free rent for your client. So May 1st is when they start counting that free rent. May, June, July. So lease commencement is terms begin,
okay.
right? So May,
Sex
June, July, free rent. Rent commencement, August 1st.
Okay. Date tenant pays rent. That's the commencement. And then the rent abatement is the free rent, of course.
Is the free rent, right? Which is not the same as prepaid rent, right? Because let's say you got them 3 months of rent abatement and part of the security deposit was first month paid. So little math problem here, right? 3 months of rent abated is May, June, July, but part of the security deposit was the first month paid rent, right? So August is already paid at lease execution, right? So they don't technically start paying until September because August is already prepaid.
So lease execution is when they sign. Lease commencement, date the terms begin. Rent commencement, date the tenant pays rent. And then, of course, the rent abatement is the free rent.
Is the free rent, right? And there's a whole other section that we can go into on tenant improvements and tenant improvement allowance, which is a subsection in the LOI that you can add. And I'll be really brief on that one because it is important. Sometimes you're going to see plazas that are in vanilla shell. What does that mean? Drywall is up, cement floors, but you have plumbing, mechanical, and HVAC in place. Vanilla shell. You're going to have build out, right? A lot of times landlords in those conditions will say, we'll give you $10 a square foot for tenant improvement. So what does that mean? It's 10,000 a square foot times 2,000. That's $20,000 worth of tenant improvement. And so you're going to want to ask for that in the letter of intent. You might say, well, they need $15 a square foot because they're going to put more than $500,000 into this location. And that's a negotiation point as well, is your tenant improvement. Any other questions? I can just sense you that you're writing down your notes at a light speed, Jennifer.
Yeah. So vanilla is technically drywall, electrical, and plumbing, right? Or does that
Mechanical,
some,
plumbing, HVAC in place. They have the bathroom connections, right? That's vanilla shell. Drywall, concrete floor. Maybe they have flooring, maybe they don't. That's vanilla shell. Gray shell, concrete walls. They got the connections, maybe to know where the bathroom would go, but they probably don't even have HVAC in yet. It's very, very bare. That's gray shell.
and that's typically when you would ask for TI, correct?
You would ask for TI in gray shell or vanilla shell.
Either. Okay.
Hmm? Yeah, TI is always negotiable, no matter what the condition of the unit is. But typically, you'll get it in gray shell or vanilla shell because the landlord is saving money by not doing a full build out on all their units. So they're just basically saying, "I'm willing to share those costs with any of the tenants that are coming in." Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I have another question.
Ruth?
How normal is that the landlord asks for any repair of the AC during the lease to be done by
Mm.
the tenant?
Okay. So that's a big one because that's always one that you have to fight for. This is the standard. The tenant has to repair the AC and maintain regular maintenance or regular servicing on the HVAC. Okay. Any minor repairs is on tenant. Now, if it breaks down despite the tenant doing regular service on the HVAC, at that point, it should be the landlord's responsibility to do those major repairs or replace the HVAC. Okay. This is where it gets very touchy because some landlords will say it's the tenant's responsibility to replace it, to repair it. Whatever happens to the HVAC is the tenant's responsibility. A lot of times you have to fight for that. And you have to fight by saying, well, what if it breaks down because it's old, but the tenant was doing regular service? It didn't break down because the tenant didn't service it or because the tenant didn't do the proper repairs. It broke down because it was old before the tenant moved in. So how is that going to be the tenant's responsibility?
Yeah, because in this area it's very normal that the landlord don't care. It's take it or leave it, but it's like that. Yeah,
They will do that and they will fight, but that doesn't
yeah,
mean you
they are
can't push
like
back.
that here. Yeah, so that's what I ask him because I say, okay, the tenant has to pay for everything, broken equipment or maintain. And this area is very
Typically, but what if,
typical.
for example, the engine blows out? It has nothing to do with what the tenant did. It was because the HVAC was 10, 12, 15 years old, right?
Yeah,
And let's say the tenant moves in and it breaks down 3 months after they move in, the engine blows. That
mm,
should not be the tenant's responsibility
yeah,
because they
that's
can show you receipts that they did service. And they
yeah,
can show receipts that when they did the service, the AC mechanic said this AC needs to be replaced because it's old, right?
yeah.
So
Okay,
those are little points that, yes, like I said, you're going to see landlords that are going to say, I don't want to deal with it. That's the tenant's responsibility. And if you don't have proper representation, tenants will sign it.
yeah,
But that's
okay,
where you come in as the advisor and you say, we need better terms. If the repair is more than X amount, it should be the landlord's responsibility because my tenant is going to do regular service on that unit every month.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Okay? You're welcome. All right. We are coming up on time. So if there's any more questions, now's the time. If not, then we can go ahead and conclude. And you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. And I will send out the recording once it is processed. Okay?
Thank you. And did you send out the template as well?
It is in the
Word?
chat.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mauricio, ¿vas a compartir esta clase?
Ya la grabé. Voy a compartir el documento una vez más para que lo tengan. Let me share the document one more time, just in case you guys didn't see it. So give me a second to share. Okay, save. You're very welcome. Yeah, and I'll share this in the group chat once the recording processes so that you guys can come back to this and review all those terms. But there's the template, y'all. And if you guys need me, I'll be in my office.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Alrighty.
Thank you,
Have a good day.
Mauricio. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mauricio.